Chapter 18. They had a very pleasant walk, sitting down often in warm, time-scented corners. If anything could have helped Rose recover from her bitter disappointment that morning, it was Mr. Briggs's company. He really did help her feel better. The same transformation happened to Rose that had happened to Lottie with her husband. The more Mr. Briggs found Rose charming, the more charming she actually became. Briggs was a very open man who didn't like to waste time. Before they even reached the end of the peninsula, where the lighthouse stood, he had asked her to show him the lighthouse because the path was wide enough for them to walk side by side and fairly flat. He confessed the impression she had made on him back in London. Since even the most religious and serious women like to know they've made an impression, especially the kind that has nothing to do with their character or good deeds, Rose was pleased. She smiled, and her smile made her look more attractive than ever. Her cheeks flushed with color and her eyes brightened. She found herself saying things that sounded interesting and even funny. If Frederick were listening now, she thought, maybe he would see she wasn't a hopeless bore after all. Here was a good-looking, young, and intelligent man. She hoped he was intelligent, which would make the compliment even better, who was clearly happy to spend the whole afternoon just talking to her. However, Mr. Briggs was too lively for her to think about Frederick right then. She praised the servants when he asked about them, and praised the yellow sitting room without mentioning that she had only been in it once and was embarrassing kicked out. She admitted she knew very little about art or antiques, but thought she could learn if someone explained them to her, and she said she had spent every day outdoors because the scenery was so wonderful and unlike anything she had ever seen. Briggs walked beside her along his paths, which were happily her paths for the moment, and felt the warm comfort of family life. He was an orphan and an only child with a very domestic nature. He would have adored a sister and spoiled a mother, and lately he had started thinking about marriage. Although he had been happy with his past relationships, each of which had surprisingly ended in close friendship, he loved children and felt it was time to settle down if he didn't want to be too old when his first child grew up. San Salvador had started to feel a bit empty to him. He felt like his footsteps echoed in the halls, and he had been so lonely there that he decided to rent it out this spring. The castle needed a wife. It needed that final touch of warmth and beauty. He always pictured his future wife as beautiful and kind. He found it funny how in love he already was with this imaginary wife. He was hitting it off so quickly with the lady, with the lovely name as they walked toward the lighthouse, that he knew he would soon be telling her all about his past, his life, and his future hopes. The thought of opening up so fast made him laugh.
"Why are you laughing?"
she asked, looking at him with a smile.
"It feels like coming home."
He said.
"But this is your home. I mean really coming home, to a family. I never had a family since I'm an orphan."
"Oh, are you?" Rose said sympathetically.
"I hope you haven't been one for very long. No, I mean, I hope you have been one for a long time so you are used to it. I'm sorry, I don't know what I mean except that I'm sorry."
He laughed again.
"Oh, I'm used to it. I don't have anyone, no brothers or sisters." "So you're an only child?"
she noted.
"Yes, and there is something about you that feels exactly like my idea of a family."
She was amused. "So cozy," he said, looking at her as he searched for the right word.
"You wouldn't think so if you saw my house in Hampstead,"
she said. A picture of her cold, stiff house came to mind, where the only soft thing was the neglected antique sofa. No wonder Frederick avoided it, she thought, suddenly seeing things clearly. There was nothing cozy about his home life.
"I don't think any place you live in could be anything but exactly like you,"
he said.
"You're not going to claim San Salvador is like me, are you?" "I absolutely do. You have to admit it is beautiful, right?"
He said several sweet things like that. She thoroughly enjoyed their walk. She couldn't remember having such a pleasant stroll since her husband was courting her. When she returned for tea with Mr. Briggs, Mr. Wilkins noticed that she looked completely different. Trouble here, definitely trouble, Mr. Wilkins thought, virtually rubbing his hands in anticipation of a new client. He could already picture himself being asked for legal advice. On one hand, there was her husband, Mr. Arbuthnot. On the other hand, there was Briggs. Trouble was brewing. But why had Briggs's telegram shocked her so much at first? If she had turned pale from pure excitement, then the drama was closer than he thought. She wasn't pale now, her cheeks were as rosy as her name. Well, he was the right man to handle trouble. He was sorry when people got into messes, but if they did, he was ready to help. Energized by these thoughts and eager for business, Mr. Wilkins helped play host to Mr. Briggs. Acting as a temporary co-owner and future advisor, he showed great hospitality, pointing out the features of the property and taking him to the wall to show him Mazago across the bay. Mrs. Fisher was also very polite. This was the young man's house, making him a property owner. She liked property and respected those who owned it, especially someone so young. It was inherited, of course, which she considered more respectable than earning it oneself. It proved he came from a good family, and in an age where family background seemed ignored, she appreciated that. So tea was a very pleasant meal, with everyone friendly and happy. Briggs thought Mrs. Fisher was a sweet old lady and treated her that way, and the San Salvador magic worked again. She actually became a sweet old lady. She was warm and almost playful with him, even calling him "my dear boy" before tea was finished. These were strange words for Mrs. Fisher, who had probably never used them in her life. Rose was amazed. How nice people really could be. When would she stop misjudging everyone? She had never suspected this side of Mrs. Fisher, and she began to wonder if the woman's difficult attitude had actually been a reaction to Rose's own argumentative and annoying behavior. It probably was. How awful she must have been. Rose felt deeply regretful as she watched Mrs. Fisher blossom into genuine friendliness just because someone was nice to her. She felt a wave of shame when Mrs. Fisher laughed, realizing that she had never heard the sound before. None of them had heard Mrs. Fisher laugh since they arrived. It was a sad reflection on all of them. The others had all laughed at some point, but Mrs. Fisher never had. Since she was clearly capable of enjoying herself, it was obvious she hadn't been happy until now. Nobody had cared about her feelings, except maybe Lottie. Lottie had wanted her to be happy, but she seemed to rub Mrs. Fisher the wrong way, whereas Rose had never spent 5 minutes with her without wanting to argue. How terrible she had been. She had behaved unpardonably. Her regret showed in her polite, gentle attention toward Mrs. Fisher, which made the observant Briggs think she was even more angelic. He briefly wished he were an old lady just so Rose Arbuthnot would treat him that way. He felt there was no end to her kindness. He wouldn't even mind taking terrible-tasting medicine if Rose were the one serving it to him. Sensing his bright blue eyes, made even brighter by his deep tan, fixed on her with a twinkle, she smiled and asked him what he was thinking about. He replied that he couldn't tell her that just yet, but added, "Someday." Trouble, trouble, Mr. Wilkins thought, once again imagining the legal fees. Yes, I'm their man. I'm sure, Mrs. Fisher said kindly.
You don't have any thoughts we shouldn't hear.
I'm sure, Briggs said.
I'd be telling you all my secrets within a week.
You would be telling them to someone very safe.
Mrs. Fisher replied warmly she would have loved to have a son like him. And in return, she added,
I would probably tell you mines.
Oh no, Mr. Wilkins joined in, trying to match their playful tone.
I must protest, I really must. I have a prior claim as the older friend. I've known Mrs. Fisher for 10 days and you, Briggs, haven't even known her for one. I claim the right to hear her secrets first. That is, if she has any, which I doubt. Oh yes, I do.
Mrs. Fisher exclaimed, thinking of her feeling of sprouting new leaves. That she said anything at all was surprising, but doing it so cheerfully was a miracle. Rose could only watch her in astonishment.
Then I shall extract them,
Briggs said with equal cheer.
They won't need much extracting,
Mrs. Fisher said.
My difficulty is keeping them from bursting out.
She sounded just like Lottie. Mr. Wilkins adjusted his monocle and studied Mrs. Fisher closely. Rose watched, smiling because Mrs. Fisher seemed so amused, though she didn't quite know why. Her smile was a bit tentative, as a happy Mrs. Fisher was a new and slightly intimidating sight that would take some getting used to. What Mrs. Fisher was actually thinking was how surprised they would be if she told them she felt like she was sprouting flower buds. They would think she was a silly old woman, just as she would have thought herself a few days ago. But she was getting used to the idea of blossoming. She was more softened and receptive now. Although it would be best if her physical appearance matched her youthful feelings, you couldn't have everything. Wasn't it better to feel young inside rather than old all over? There would be plenty of time to feel completely old, inside and out, when she returned to her tomb of a house at Prince of Wales Terrace. However, without Briggs's arrival, Mrs. Fisher probably would have stayed locked inside her shell. The others only knew her as harsh. Her pride wouldn't have let her relax suddenly, especially in front of 3 young women. But the stranger Briggs had immediately taken a liking to her. His genuine appreciation, Briggs had thought she was exactly the kind of grandmother he wished he had, helped Mrs. Fisher break out of her shell. Here was at last, just as Lottie had predicted, happy, good-tempered, and kind. Lottie returned from her picnic half an hour later. Following the voices to the upper garden in hopes of finding some tea left, she saw what had happened right away, because Mrs. Fisher was laughing at that very moment. She's broken out of her cocoon, Lottie thought. Quick and impulsive as ever, and completely unconcerned with formalities, she leaned over the back of Mrs. Fisher's chair and kissed her on the cheek. "Good heavens," Mrs. Fisher cried, jumping in surprise. Nothing like that had happened to her since the early days of her marriage, and even then, her husband had only kissed her very formally. This was a warm, genuine kiss that lingered on her cheek with a strange, soft sweetness. When she saw who had kissed her, she blushed deeply. Mrs. Wilkins was kissing her, and it felt so affectionate. Even if she wanted to, she couldn't put on her stern face and start scolding in front of Mr. Briggs. But she didn't want to. Was it possible that Mrs. Wilkins actually liked her, and had liked her all this time, even while Mrs. Fisher was busy disliking her? A little warmth seeped through Mrs. Fisher's cold defenses. Someone young had kissed her. Someone young had actually wanted to kiss her. Blushing deeply, she watched the odd woman, who seemed completely unaware that she had done anything unusual. Lottie shook hands with Mr. Briggs when her husband introduced him, and immediately began chatting with him as if they were old friends. What an unusual, strange woman. It made sense that she might have misjudged someone so unique. "I'm sure you want some tea," Briggs said warmly to Lottie. He thought she was delightful, freckles, messy hair and all. He would have loved a sister like her. "This is cold," he said, touching the teapot.
"I'll tell Francesca to make some fresh tea."
He stopped and blushed.
"Am I forgetting that I don't live here?"
He laughed, looking around at them.
Very natural, very naturals."
Mr. Wilkins assured him.
"I'll go tell Francesca."
Rose said, standing up. "No, no," Briggs said, "don't leave." He put his hands to his mouth and called out. "Francesca," Briggs called out. She came running. None of their calls had ever been answered so quickly. "Her master's voice," Mr. Wilkins remarked, thinking it was a very clever comment.
"Make some fresh tea."
Briggs ordered in Italian. "Quick, quick." Then, remembering he wasn't host, he blushed again and apologized to everyone.
Very natural, very naturals.
Mr. Wilkins assured him again. Briggs then explained to Lottie what he had already told the others. He was on his way to Rome, decided to get off at Mazzego to see if they were comfortable, and planned to resume his trip the next day, spending the night at a hotel in Mazzego. "But that's ridiculous," Lottie said. "Of course you must stay here. It's your house. There's Kate Lumley's room." She added, turning to Mrs. Fisher. "You wouldn't mind Mr. Briggs using it for one night. Kate Lumley isn't in it, you know," she said to Briggs, laughing. To her own surprise, Mrs. Fisher laughed too. She knew that at any other time, she would have found the joke highly inappropriate, but now she just found it amusing. No, indeed, she assured Briggs, Kate Lumley was not in that room, which was lucky, because Kate was a very large woman and the bedroom was extremely narrow. Kate might fit inside, but that was about all. Once in, she would be wedged so tightly she might never get out. The room was completely at Mr. Briggs's disposal, and she hoped he wouldn't do something as silly as stay at a hotel, especially since he owned the castle. Rose listened to this speech in utter disbelief. Mrs. Fisher laughed heartily as she spoke, and Lottie laughed too, leaning down to kiss Mrs. Fisher several more times.
So you see, my dear boy,
Mrs. Fisher said,
you must stay here and join us. We would love to have yous.
Mr. Wilkins agreed heartily.
Yes, very much indeed.
Mrs. Fisher repeated, looking like a proud mother. Please do, Rose said, when Briggs looked at her for her approval.
How kind of you all.
He said, beaming.
I'd love to be a guest here. What a new experience, and with 3 such.
He stopped and looked around. Wait, he asked.
Shouldn't I have a 4th hostess? Francesca said she had 4 mistresses.
Yes, Lady Caroline, Lottie said.
Then shouldn't we make sure she wants me to stay too?
Oh, I'm sure she. Lottie began.
The daughter of Lord Droitwich Briggs
Mr. Wilkins said,
is not likely to lack basic manners and hospitality.
The daughter of, Briggs started, but he stopped dead. Standing in the doorway was Lady Caroline herself. Or rather, walking toward him out of the dark doorway into the bright sunset was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life, his dream of absolute perfection. Chapter 19. And then when she spoke, what chance did poor Briggs stand? He was completely infatuated. All Scrap said was,
How do you do?
When Mr. Wilkins introduced him, but it was enough to completely undo Briggs. From a cheerful, talkative, happy young man full of life and friendliness, he became quiet and serious, with sweat dripping from his forehead. He also became clumsy, dropping the teaspoon as he handed her a cup and spilling the cookies so that one rolled on the floor. He couldn't take his eyes off her beautiful face for a second. Meanwhile, Mr. Wilkins explained the situation to Lady Caroline since Briggs was too tongue-tied to do so himself. He told her that Mr. Briggs owned San Salvador, was traveling to Rome but had stopped at Mazego, and that the other 3 ladies had invited him to stay the night in his own house instead of a hotel. He added that Briggs was just waiting for her approval as the 4th hostess. While Mr. Wilkins delivered this explanation in his clear, polished voice, Briggs just sat there without saying a single word. A deep sadness washed over Scrap. The signs of an admirer who would try to cling to her were all too familiar, and she knew that if Briggs stayed, her peaceful vacation would be over. Then she thought of Kate Lumley. She clung to the thought of Kate like a lifesaver.
It would be lovely,
She said, giving Briggs a faint smile. She had to be polite and smile at least a little, but even that small smile showed her dimple, making Briggs stare even harder.
I'm just wondering if there is enough room.
Yes, there is, Lottie said. There's Kate Lumley's room.
I thought your friend was arriving immediately.
Scrap said to Mrs. Fisher. To Briggs, her voice sounded like the most beautiful music he had ever heard. Oh no, Mrs. Fisher replied with a surprising calmness Scrap noticed. Miss Lumley, Mr. Wilkins said, then turned to Mrs. Fisher.
Or should I say Mrs.? No one has ever married Kate.
Mrs. Fisher said smugly.
Quite so, Miss Lumley isn't arriving today anyway, Lady Caroline, and Mr. Briggs has to continue his trip tomorrow, so his stay won't interfere with Miss Lumley's plans.
Then of course I join in the invitation, Scrap said, with what Briggs felt was the most divine warmth. He stammered a reply, blushing bright red. Scrap thought, oh boy, and turned her head away. But that just gave Briggs a view of her profile, and if anything was more beautiful than her face from the front, it was her profile. Well, it was only for this one afternoon and evening. He would surely leave first thing in the morning. It took hours to get to Rome. It would be awful if he stayed until the night train. She had a feeling the main express to Rome passed through at night. Why hadn't that Kate Lumley woman arrived yet? She had forgotten all about her, but now she recalled she was supposed to have been invited 2 weeks ago. What had happened to her? If this man got too close, he would look for her in London and follow her around. Her experienced eye told her he had the potential to be a very persistent admirer. If, thought Mr. Wilkins, watching Briggs's face in sudden silence, there was any connection between this young man and Mrs. Arbuthnot, there is going to be trouble now. It will be different from what I feared with Mr. Arbuthnot, but still the kind of problem that needs legal advice, even if it's not a public scandal. Briggs, infatuated by Lady Caroline's beauty, will try to win her over. She will naturally reject him. Mrs. Arbuthnot, ignored, will be upset. Her husband, when he arrives, will find his wife crying. If he asks why, she will be cold and distant. More trouble will follow, and they will turn to me for advice. When Lottie said Mrs. Arbuthnot wanted her husband, she was wrong. Mrs. Arbuthnot wants Briggs, and it looks like she won't get him. Well, I'm their man.
Where are your things, Mr. Briggs?
Mrs. Fisher asked maternal-like.
Shouldn't they be brought here?
The sun was setting into the sea, and the damp, sweet smell of the April evening was starting to fill the garden. Briggs snapped out of his trance. My things, he repeated.
Oh yes, I have to get them. They're at the station in Mazago. I'll send Domenico. My carriage is waiting in the village. He can use it to go back. I'll go tell him.
He stood up. He was supposedly talking to Mrs. Fisher, but his eyes were glued to Scrap, who remained silent and looked down. Then, catching himself, he stammered.
I'm so sorry, I keep forgetting. I'll go down and get them myself. We can easily send Domenico.
Rose said. At her gentle voice, he turned to look at her. Yes, there was his friend, the lady with the lovely name, but how much she seemed to have changed in just a few minutes. Was it the fading light that made her look so pale, dim, and ghostly? A kind ghost, of course, with a pretty name, but still just a shadow compared to Lady Caroline. He turned back to Scrap and completely forgot Rose existed. How could he focus on anyone else when he was standing right in front of his dream come true? Briggs had never believed anyone as beautiful as his ideal could actually exist. He had never even met anyone close to it. He had known plenty of pretty, charming women and appreciated them, but never anyone this breathtaking. He used to think he would die if he ever saw a perfectly beautiful woman. Although he didn't die upon meeting her, he became just as helpless as if he had. The others had to arrange everything for him. By asking questions, they found out his luggage was at the station in Mazago. They sent for Domenico, and with everyone's help except Scrap's, she sat silently, looking at no one. Briggs managed to give him instructions to go fetch his things. It was a sad sight to see how quickly Briggs had fallen. Everyone noticed, even Rose. Honestly, Mrs. Fisher thought, the way a pretty face can turn an intelligent man into a fool is beyond belief. Feeling the air grow cold and finding Briggs's behavior painful to watch, she went inside to order his room prepared, now regretting that she had invited him to stay. She had briefly forgotten how Lady Caroline's beauty affected men, especially since Mr. Wilkins seemed immune to it. Poor boy. He was so charming on his own. It was true that Lady Caroline was ignoring him completely, but that didn't help. Men were like foolish moths, fluttering around the flame of a pretty face. She had seen it happen far too often. She almost laid a motherly hand on Briggs's blonde head as she walked past him. Poor boy. Then Scrap finished her cigarette, got up, and went inside too. She saw no reason to sit there just so Mr. Briggs could stare at her. She would have liked to stay out longer in her corner behind the bushes to watch the sunset, see the lights twinkle on in the village below, and enjoy the cool evening air, but she knew Mr. Briggs would follow her if she did. The familiar nuisance had started again. Her peaceful holiday was disrupted, maybe even ruined, for who knew if he would actually leave tomorrow. He might leave the castle to make room for Kate Lumley, but he could easily rent a room in the village and come up every day. She hated how people tried to claim others this way, and she was so cursed with her looks that she couldn't even scowl at him without it being taken as a flirtation. Scrap, who loved this time of evening in her private corner, felt annoyed with Mr. Briggs for ruining it. She turned her back on him in the garden and walked toward the house without a word or a look. But the moment Briggs realized she was leaving, he jumped up, moved chairs out of her way, kicked a footstool aside, rushed to hold the open door for her, and followed her down the hall. What could she do with him? Well, it was his hallway. She couldn't stop him from walking in it. "I hope," he said, unable to look away from her as they walked, causing him to bump into a bookcase, an old cupboard, and the hall table, spilling water from the flower vase.
"That you are comfortable here. If you aren't, I'll fire everyone."
His voice shook. What was she going to do with him? She could hide in her room, pretend to be sick, and skip dinner, but that felt like letting him control her actions.
I'm very comfortable indeed.
Scrap said.
"If I had only known you were coming."
He began.
It's a wonderful old place.
Scrap said, trying to sound as cold and distant as possible, though she doubted it would work. The kitchen was on the same floor, and as they passed the cracked door, the servants watched them. Their knowing look said it all. They saw what was coming, understood it completely, and approved.
"Are you going upstairs?"
Briggs asked as she stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Yes."
"Which room do you spend time in? The drawing room or the small yellow room?"
"In my bedroom." That meant he couldn't follow her up. All he could do was wait until she came back down. He wanted to ask which room was hers. It thrilled him to hear her call a room in his house her own, so he could picture her in it. He wondered if it might be his former bedroom, but he didn't dare ask. He would find out later from Francesca or someone else.
"So I won't see you again until dinner."
Dinner is at 8.
Scrap replied evasively as she walked up the stairs. He watched her go. She passed the Madonna painting, and the portrait that resembled Rose Arbuthnot seemed to fade into insignificance as she walked by. As she turned the corner of the staircase, the setting sun caught her face through the window, making her look radiant. Then she disappeared, the sun went down, and the staircase became dark and empty. He listened until her footsteps faded, trying to guess which door closed. Then he wandered back through the hall and out to the upper garden. Looking out her window, Scrap saw him there. She saw Lottie and Rose sitting on the far wall, where she wished she could be, and she saw Mr. Wilkins cornering Briggs, clearly telling him the story of the oleander tree in the middle of the garden. Briggs listened patiently, which she thought was nice of him since it was his family's oleander and his father's story. She recognized the story from Mr. Wilkins' gestures. Domenico had told her shortly after she arrived, and he had told Mrs. Fisher, who passed it to Mr. Wilkins. Mrs. Fisher loved this story. It was about a cherrywood walking stick that Briggs's father had stuck into the ground, telling Domenico's father, the gardener then, to plant an oleander there. He left the stick as a reminder, and eventually, the stick itself sprouted into the oleander tree. There was poor Mr. Briggs, patiently listening to a story he must have known since childhood. He was probably thinking of something else. She feared he was. It was so unfortunate how people felt the need to possess and cling to others. If only they could learn to stand on their own. Why couldn't Mr. Briggs be more like Lottie, who never demanded anything from anyone, but was complete on her own and respected others? She loved being around Lottie, where she felt both free and supported. Mr. Briggs seemed like a nice guy, too. She thought she might actually like him if he didn't like her so much. Scrap felt gloomy. Here she was, stuck in her hot bedroom because of Mr. Briggs, instead of enjoying the cool garden. It was an unbearable restriction, she thought, getting annoyed. She wouldn't put up with it. She would go out anyway. She would slip downstairs while Mr. Wilkins, who was proving to be a real lifesaver, kept Mr. Briggs busy with the oleander story. She would slip out the front door and hide in the shadows of the winding path. No one could see her there, and no one would think to look for her. She grabbed a shawl, planning to stay out for a long time, maybe even skipping dinner, and it would be Mr. Briggs's fault if she went hungry. Checking out the window to make sure the coast was clear, she slipped outside to the winding path and sat on one of the benches placed at the turns for tired walkers. Ah, this was wonderful, Scrap thought with a sigh of relief. It was so cool and smelled so fresh. She could see the calm water of the little harbor through the pine trees and the lights turning on in the houses across the bay. The green dusk was dotted with pink gladiolas in the grass and white daisies. It was so peaceful. Nothing moved, not a single leaf. The only sound was a dog barking far off in the hills or the occasional burst of voices from the restaurant below when its door opened and shut quickly. She took a deep breath of pleasure. She stopped mid-breath. What was that? She leaned forward, listening intently. Footsteps on the path. Was it Briggs finding her? Should she run? No, the footsteps were coming up, not down. It must be someone from the village, maybe Angelo bringing groceries. She relaxed, but the footsteps didn't sound like Angelo's quick pace. They were slow, heavy, and paused frequently. Someone who isn't used to walking uphill, Scrap thought. She didn't think of running back to the house. She wasn't afraid of anything except unwanted affection. Criminals held no terror for her. She would only fear them if they stopped trying to rob her and tried to flirt instead. A moment later, the person turned the corner of the path and stopped. Catching his breath, Scrap thought, not looking back. When the man didn't move, she turned around and was astonished to see Ferdinand Arundel, a well-known memoir writer she had seen frequently in London. She stared. Being followed didn't surprise her anymore, but she was shocked he had found her. Her mother had promised not to tell anyone where she was. "You," she said, feeling betrayed. "Here." He walked up to her and took off his hat. His forehead was sweaty from the unaccustomed climb. He looked embarrassed and pleading, like a guilty but loyal dog. "You must forgive me," he said. "Lady Droitwich told me where you were. Since I was passing through on my way to Rome, I decided to stop at Mazego and drop by to see how you were."
But didn't my mother tell you I was on a rest cure?
"Yes, she did. That's why I didn't disturb you earlier. I thought you would probably sleep all day and wake up around now to eat."
But
"I know, I have no excuse. I couldn't help myself."
this is what happens when Mother insists on inviting authors to lunch, and when I look much friendlier than I actually am, Scrap thought. She had been nice to Ferdinand Arundel. She liked him, or at least didn't dislike him. He seemed like a jolly, simple man with the eyes of a friendly dog. In London, he had admired her but hadn't tried to force himself on her. There, he had just been a harmless, pleasant conversationalist who made lunch parties fun. Now it turned out he was a clinger too. How dare he follow her all the way here? No one else had. Maybe her mother gave him the address because she thought he was completely harmless and could escort her home. Still, whatever he was, he wouldn't cause as much trouble as Mr. Briggs. Briggs was young, reckless, and could easily make a scene. She could picture Briggs using rope ladders or singing under her window, which would be very awkward. Mr. Arundel was not built for that kind of adventure. He had lived too long and eaten too many good dinners. He was at least 40. If a man spent 40 years writing books instead of exercising, he would naturally have Mr. Arundel's stout build, suited for conversation rather than action. Scrap, who had felt gloomy when Briggs arrived, became practical upon seeing Arundel. Since he was here, she couldn't send him away until he had eaten dinner. So she might as well make the best of it. Besides, he could serve as a shield against Mr. Briggs. Since she already knew Ferdinand, they could talk about mutual friends and her mother, which would keep Briggs at bay during dinner. It was only for one evening, and he wasn't going to eat her. So she decided to be friendly.
"I'm having dinner at 8.
She said, ignoring his last comment.
"And you must come up and join us. Sit down, cool off, and tell me how everyone is doing."
"Can I really dine with you, in these travel clothes?"
he asked, wiping his brow before sitting next to her. She was too beautiful to be real, he thought. Just looking at her and hearing her voice made the whole trip worth it.
"Of course, I assume you left your carriage in the village and will take the night train from Mazego."
"Or stay at a hotel in Mazego and leave tomorrow. But tell me about yourself,"
he said, staring at her profile.
"London has been so boring and empty. Lady Droitwich said you were staying with people she didn't know. I hope they've been nice to you. You look wonderful, like your rest cure worked perfectly."
"They've been very kind.
Scrap said.
I found them through an advertisement."
An advertisement.
I find it's a great way to make friends. I'm actually closer to one of them than I've been to anyone in years.
Really? Who is it?
You can guess who it is when you meet them. Tell me about my mother. When did you see her last? We agreed not to write to each other unless it was important. I wanted a completely quiet month.
And now I've come and interrupted you. I'm so ashamed of doing this, but I couldn't help myself.
Oh, don't worry, Scrap said quickly. He couldn't have arrived on a better day since the infatuated Briggs was waiting for her up at the house.
I'm actually very glad to see you. Tell me about Mother.
Chapter 20. Scrap wanted to know so much about her mother that Arundel soon had to start making things up. He would talk about anything she wanted just to be near her, see her, and hear her speak. But he actually knew very little about the Droitwich family and their circle, other than meeting them at large literary events and entertaining them at lunch and dinner parties. To them, he was always just Mr. Arundel, never Ferdinand. He only knew the same gossip published in evening papers and discussed in gentlemen's clubs. However, he was good at storytelling. Once he ran out of real facts, he began making things up to answer her questions and keep her with him. It was easy to attribute some of his own funny thoughts to other people and pretend they had done them. Scrap, whose affection for her parents grew stronger during her absence, was desperate for news and listened with growing interest to the stories he spun. At first, it was just ordinary updates. He had run into her mother here and there. She looked well and said this or that. But soon, the comments he attributed to Lady Droitwich took on a surprising quality. They became hilarious. Mother said that, Scrap interrupted, surprised. And soon, Lady Droitwich was doing funny things as well as saying them. Mother did that, Scrap asked, wide-eyed. Arundel got into his groove. He attributed some of his own best ideas to Lady Droitwich, along with any charming, funny stories he could think of or make up, since he had a very active imagination. Scrap's eyes widened with wonder and pride. How funny, imagine her mother doing that. What an absolute darling. Did she really do that? How adorable. And did she really say that? How brilliant of her to think of it. What kind of face did Lloyd George make? She laughed and laughed, wishing she could hug her mother. Time flew by. It grew dusk, then nearly dark, while Mr. Arundel kept entertaining her. It was 7:45 before she suddenly remembered dinner. Oh my goodness, she exclaimed, jumping up.
Yes, it is late.
Arundel said,
I'll go ahead quickly and send the maid to show you in. I must run, or I'll never be ready in time.
And she hurried up the path as swiftly as a young, slender deer. Arundel followed. He didn't want to arrive sweaty, so he walked slowly. Fortunately, he was near the top. Francesca came down the pergola to guide him inside, and after showing him where to wash up, she left him in the empty drawing room to cool off by the crackling wood fire. He stood in one of the deep window alcoves, as far from the fire as possible, looking at the distant lights of Mezzago. The drawing room door was open, and the house was quiet with the usual pre-dinner hush while everyone was in their rooms dressing. Briggs was in his room, tossing aside one ruined tie after another. Scrap was in her room, hurrying into a black dress with the vague hope that Mr. Briggs wouldn't notice her as much in black. Mrs. Fisher was pinning the lace shawl that transformed her day dress into evening wear, using the brooch Ruskin had given her for her wedding, 2 pearl lilies tied, with a blue enamel ribbon bearing the gold inscription Esto Perpetua. Mr. Wilkins was sitting on the edge of the bed brushing his wife's hair, showing how much more affectionate he had become in this 3rd week, while Lottie sat in front of him, putting buttons into his clean shirt. Rose, already dressed, sat by her window reflecting on her day. Rose was fully aware of what had happened to Mr. Briggs. Even if she hadn't noticed, Lottie had made it obvious with her frank comments when they sat on the wall after tea. Lottie was thrilled to see more love at San Salvador, even if it was one-sided. She said that once Rose's husband arrived, now that Mrs. Fisher had finally softened up, Rose objected to Lottie's phrasing, but Lottie claimed she got the expression from Keats. There wouldn't be a happier place on earth than San Salvador.
Your husband might be here very soon.
Lottie said, swinging her legs.
Maybe tomorrow evening if he leaves right away. We'll have a wonderful last few days before we go home refreshed. I don't think any of us will ever be the same, and I wouldn't be surprised if Caroline ends up liking young Briggs. It's in the air. You just have to love people here.
Rose sat at her window thinking about this. Lottie was so optimistic, yet her predictions had come true with Mr. Wilkins and Mrs. Fisher. If only it would happen for Frederick too. Rose, who had temporarily stopped thinking about Frederick during her walk, was now thinking about him more than ever. That brief period of admiration had been funny and delightful, but of course it ended the moment Caroline appeared. Rose knew she couldn't compete. Anyone could see Lady Caroline's unique beauty. Still, being admired and appreciated made a person feel so warm and confident, as if they really deserved it. It seemed to bring hidden parts of her to life. She was sure she had been entertaining and even pretty this afternoon. She was certain of it. She had seen it in Mr. Briggs's eyes as clearly as in a mirror. For a short time, she felt like a sluggish fly brought back to life by a warm fire on a cold day. She still felt a pleasant thrill just remembering it. It was fun having an admirer, even briefly. No wonder people liked it. It really did make you feel alive. Even though it was over, she still felt a glow of excitement and optimism she hadn't felt since she was a girl, much like how Lottie must feel all the time. She dressed carefully. Even though she knew Mr. Briggs wouldn't notice her now, she enjoyed seeing how pretty she could make herself look. She almost put a red camellia in her hair by her ear. She held it there for a moment, and it looked incredibly attractive, matching the color of her lips perfectly. But she took it out with a smile and a sigh and placed it in water where flowers belonged. She mustn't be silly, she thought. She had to think of her charity work and the poor. Soon she would be back in London, and how ridiculous would a camellia in her hair look then? Completely absurd. But she was determined about one thing. The moment she got home, she would have a serious talk with Frederick. If he didn't come to San Salvador, that would be her very first step. She should have done it long ago, but she had always been held back by how much she loved him and how much she feared getting hurt again. But now, even if he hurt her as much as possible, she would still talk to him. Not that he ever hurt her on purpose. She knew he didn't mean to and often had no idea he had done it. For a writer, Rose thought, Frederick didn't seem to have much empathy or imagination. Anyway, she told herself as she stood up, things couldn't go on like this. She was going to speak up. She was tired of this separate life and cold loneliness. Why shouldn't she be happy? Why on earth shouldn't she be loved and allow herself to love? She looked at her clock. There were still 10 minutes before dinner. Tired of waiting in her room, she decided to go to Mrs. Fisher's balcony, which would be empty now, and watch the moon rise over the sea. With that plan, she walked into the empty upper hall. But she was drawn to the drawing room by the warm glow of firelight shining through the open door. It looked so cheerful. The fire completely changed the room. In the daylight, it was dark and ugly, but now it was transformed just as she had been by the warmth of. No, she mustn't be silly. She must think of the poor. That thought always brought her back to reality. She peeped inside. Firelight, flowers, and the dark blue night visible through the narrow windows. How lovely. San Salvador was such a sweet place, and that beautiful lilac on the table, she wanted to go over and smell it. But she never reached the lilac. She took one step toward it and froze. Standing in the far corner, looking out the window, was Frederick. All the blood rushed to Rose's heart, and it felt like it stopped beating. Frederick had come. She stood perfectly still. He hadn't heard her and didn't turn around. She just stared at him. The miracle had actually happened. He was here. She held her breath. He must need her, since he had come immediately. He must have been thinking of her and longing for her too. Her heart, which had seemed to stop, was now racing so fast it took her breath away. Frederick did love her. He had to, or why would he be here? Perhaps her absence had made him realize he wanted her. Now, the talk she had planned would be so easy. Her thoughts came to a halt. Her mind went blank. She couldn't think logically. She could only see and feel. She had no idea how it had happened, but it was a miracle. God could perform miracles, and he had performed this one. Her thoughts trailed off again. Frederick, she tried to say, but no sound came, or if it did, the crackling fire drowned it out. She had to go closer. She began to walk toward him very quietly. He didn't move, he hadn't heard a thing. She crept closer and closer, and the crackling fire hid the sound of her steps. She stopped for a second, unable to breathe. She felt a wave of fear. What if? But no, he had come. She stepped closer, right up behind him. Her heart was beating so loudly she thought he must hear it. Couldn't he feel her presence? Didn't he know she was there? "Frederick," she whispered, her voice barely a breath because of her racing heart. He spun around. "Rose," he exclaimed, staring at her in shock. But she didn't notice his stunned look. Her arms were already around his neck, and her cheek was pressed against his. She whispered in his ear.
"I knew you would come. Deep down, I always knew you would come."
Chapter 21. Frederick wasn't the type to hurt anyone if he could avoid it, but he was completely baffled. Not only was his wife here, in this remote place, but she was hugging him like she hadn't in years, whispering sweet words and welcoming him. If she welcomed him, she must have been expecting him. Bizarre as it was, that was the only clear thing, that, and the softness of her cheek against his and her sweet, familiar scent. Frederick was confused, but not wanting to hurt her, he put his arms around her and kissed her. Soon, he was kissing her almost as tenderly as she kissed him, then just as tenderly, and then even more tenderly, as if they had never been apart. He was confused, but he could still kiss her. It felt surprisingly natural. It made him feel 30 again instead of 40, and made Rose feel like the 20-year-old he had adored before she began judging his actions against her strict morals. Back then, she had judged him and found him wanting, turning cold, distant, and constantly shocked. He couldn't reach her at all. She refused to understand. She judged everything by how it looked in the eyes of God. Her sad face, her strict principles certainly didn't make her happy, and her strained efforts to be patient had eventually driven him away. She should never have been raised by that narrow-minded minister of a father. She wasn't built to handle such a rigid upbringing. How she got here and why she was acting like his sweet Rose again was beyond him, but until he figured it out, he kept kissing her. In fact, he couldn't stop. Now he was the one whispering sweet things in her ear, burying his face in her sweet-scented hair that tickled him just as it used to. As he held her close and felt her arms soft around his neck, a wonderful feeling came over him. A gentle, spreading warmth he slowly recognized as security. Yes, security. He didn't have to feel self-conscious about his weight or make self-deprecating jokes to beat others to it. He didn't have to feel embarrassed about getting sweaty walking uphill, or worry about how he looked to beautiful young women, how middle-aged and foolish he must seem. Rose didn't care about any of that. With her, he was safe. To her, he was still the same lover he had always been. She would never care about the changes aging had made in him. So Frederick continued to kiss his wife with growing affection, and holding her made him forget everything else. How could he think of Lady Caroline, to name just one of his problems, when his sweet wife was back in his arms, whispering how much she loved and missed him? For just a split second, since even lovers have moments of clear thought, he realized how much more powerful a woman in your arms is compared to a beautiful one who is somewhere else. But that was as far as he got to thinking about Scrap. She was like a dream fading in the morning sun.
"When did you leave?"
Rose whispered, her lips near his ear. She couldn't let go of him, not even to talk. "Yesterday morning," Frederick whispered, holding her tight. He couldn't let go of her either.
"Oh, the very moment you got my letter."
Rose whispered. This was a bit confusing, but Frederick agreed.
Yes, the very moment.
And kissed her neck.
"How fast my letter reached you."
Rose murmured, her eyes closed in pure happiness. It really did, Frederick said, feeling like closing his own eyes. So there had been a letter. Soon things would make sense, but for now, holding his Rose again after all these years was so sweet that he didn't care to figure it out. He had been happy during their years apart, because he was naturally a cheerful man. He had a busy life, success, friends, and plenty of other women happy to make him forget his sad, rigid wife at home. She had refused to spend his money, hated his books, and drifted away. Whenever he tried to talk to her, she stubbornly asked how his writing looked in the eyes of God.
"No one should write a book God wouldn't want to read. That's the test, Frederick."
She had said once. He had laughed hysterically, yelled, and run out of the house to escape her solemn, pathetic little face. But this rose represented his youth again, the best part of his life when he still had dreams and hopes. How they had dreamed together before he started writing memoirs. They had planned, laughed, and loved. For a time, they had lived a beautiful, poetic life. After happy days came happy nights, sleeping side by side. When he woke up, she was still pressed close to him. It was wonderful to feel all of that return at her touch, to have her give him back his youth. "Sweetheart, sweetheart," he whispered, overcome by the memories, holding on to her tightly now. "My beloved husband," she whispered, feeling absolute bliss. Briggs, walking in a few minutes before dinner hoping to find Lady Caroline, was shocked. He had assumed Rose Arbuthnot was a widow, and seeing her in a passionate embrace left him stunned. "Well, I'll be damned," Briggs thought clearly. The shock of what he saw by the window snapped him right out of his own thoughts. Blushing, he said aloud, "Oh, sorry, excuse me." He stood there awkwardly, wondering if he should go back to his room. If he had stayed quiet, they wouldn't have noticed him. But when he apologized, Rose looked at him blankly, and Frederick stared at him too, not quite registering who he was. They didn't seem embarrassed at all, Briggs thought. He couldn't be her brother. No brother ever looked at a sister like that. It was very awkward. Even if they weren't embarrassed, he was. It upset him to see his pure Madonna acting this way.
"Is this a friend of yours?"
Frederick asked Rose after a moment. She made no move to introduce the awkward young man, just smiling at him with happy distraction. "It's Mr. Briggs," Rose said, coming back to earth.
"This is my husband,"
she added. As Briggs shook hands, he barely had time to think how strange it was for a widow to suddenly have a husband before the dinner gong rang. Knowing Lady Caroline would arrive any second, he stopped thinking altogether and just stared at the door. Immediately, a procession entered the room. First came Mrs. Fisher, looking very dignified in her lace shawl. She smiled warmly at Briggs but stiffened when she saw the stranger. Next was Mr. Wilkins, looking cleaner and neater than anyone else on earth. Then came Lottie, hurriedly tying her dress as she walked in, and then no one else. Lady Caroline was late. Where was she? Had she heard the gong? Should they ring it again? What if she didn't show up for dinner at all? Briggs went cold. "Introduce me," Frederick whispered, nudging Rose's elbow as Mrs. Fisher walked in. "My husband," Rose said, holding his hand, her face glowing. This must be the last of the husbands, Mrs. Fisher thought, unless Lady Caroline pulls one out of her sleeve. But she greeted him politely. He certainly looked like a proper husband, not like those men who pretended to be married when they weren't. She assumed he had come to escort his wife home at the end of the month, noting that the house would now be completely full. "So," she added, smiling at Briggs.
"We will finally get our money's worth."
Briggs forced a grin, realizing someone was teasing him, but he hadn't really heard her. He didn't look at her. He was completely focused on the door. When introduced, Mr. Wilkins was very hospitable and called Frederick sir.
"Well, sir,"
Mr. Wilkins said heartily, "Here we are." He gripped Frederick's hand with a knowing look that Frederick didn't understand, since he had no idea what kind of trouble Mr. Wilkins was anticipating. Mr. Wilkins looked him squarely in the eye, trying to project loyalty, reliability, and support. He noticed that Mrs. Arbuthnot was blushing deeply, which she never did. "Well, I'm their man," he thought. Lottie's greeting was very enthusiastic. She took both of Frederick's hands and laughed to Rose.
"Didn't I tell you?" "What did you tell her?"
Frederick asked just to say something. The warm welcome from everyone was confusing. They had clearly all expected him, not just Rose. The sandy-haired woman didn't answer, but looked thrilled to see him. Why was she so happy about his arrival?
"What a lovely place this is,"
Frederick said, making the first comment he could think of.
"It's a hot tub of love."
Lottie said earnestly, which confused him even more. His confusion turned to panic at the next words he heard from Mrs. Fisher.
"We won't wait. Lady Caroline is always late."
Hearing her name, he finally remembered Lady Caroline, and the thought of her filled him with dread. He walked into the dining room like he was dreaming. He had come here specifically to see Lady Caroline and had even told her so. In his foolishness, he had told her he couldn't help but come. She had no idea he was married. She thought his name was Arundel. In fact, everyone in London knew him as Ferdinand Arundel. He had used the pen name for so long that he almost thought of it as his real name. In the brief time since he sat with her in the garden, he had reunited with Rose, embraced her, and completely forgotten about Caroline. It would be a stroke of luck if Caroline decided to skip dinner. Then he could. No, he couldn't. He blushed even redder at the thought of running away. He couldn't just leave after dinner and take the train to Rome unless Rose came with him. But that would be so cowardly. No, he had to face it. When they reached the dining room, Mrs. Fisher sat at the head of the table. Was this her house? He wondered. He had no idea. Rose, who sat at the opposite end, led Frederick to the seat next to her. If only he could have had 5 more minutes alone with Rose to ask her, but he probably would have just kept kissing her. He looked around. Lottie was telling Briggs to sit next to Mrs. Fisher. Was the house Lottie's then? He didn't know anything. Lottie sat next to Rose, opposite Frederick, and next to Mr. Wilkins, who was looking very satisfied. The empty chair next to Frederick between him and Briggs was Lady Caroline's. Just as Caroline didn't know about Rose, Rose didn't know about Caroline. What would they both think? He had no idea. All he knew was that his wife had forgiven him, suddenly, miraculously, and beautifully. Beyond that, he was clueless. He couldn't handle the situation, so he decided to just let things happen and drift. Frederick ate his soup in silence. He could feel Lottie's large, expressive eyes watching him with growing curiosity. They were intelligent, friendly eyes. She probably thought he should start a conversation, but she wouldn't think so if she knew the truth. Briggs was quiet too, looking very uneasy. What was wrong with Briggs? Rose was silent as well, which was normal for her. She looked so happy. How long would that look last once Lady Caroline walked in? He had no idea. But Mr. Wilkins was talking enough for everyone. The man should have been a preacher. A voice like that would make him a bishop in no time. He was explaining to Briggs, who was fidgeting in his seat, that he must have taken the same train as Frederick. When Briggs silently disagreed, Mr. Wilkins proceeded to prove it with long, detailed arguments.
Who's the man with the booming voice?
Frederick whispered to Rose. Lottie, who seemed to have super hearing, answered from across the table, "He's my husband."
Then by the rules.
Frederick said, trying to be polite.
You shouldn't be sitting next to him. But I want to. I like sitting next to him now. I didn't before we came here.
Frederick couldn't think of a response, so he just smiled. "It's this place," she said, nodding.
It makes you understand things. You have no idea how much you'll figure out before you leave. I certainly hope so.
Frederick said with genuine sincerity. The soup bowls were cleared and the fish was served. Briggs, on the other side of the empty chair, looked increasingly nervous. What was his problem? Didn't he like fish? Frederick wondered how much Briggs would fidget if he were in his shoes. Frederick kept wiping his mustache and stared down at his plate, trying to hide his nervousness. Even without looking up, he knew Lottie was staring at him like a searchlight. Rose was looking at him too, but her gaze was sweet and unquestioning. How long would she look at him like that once Caroline arrived? He didn't know. He wiped his mustache for the 20th time. His hand was shaking slightly, and Lottie noticed it, staring even harder. Why was she studying him so closely? He had no idea. Suddenly, Briggs jumped to his feet. Why? Oh, right, she had arrived. Frederick wiped his mustache and stood up too. The moment of truth was here. What a ridiculous situation. Whatever happened, he would just have to deal with it. He would look like a fool and a liar to Lady Caroline, who might think he was mocking her in the garden when he said he had come because he couldn't help himself. And how would he look to Rose when Caroline introduced him as her friend whom she had invited to dinner? Only God knew. He wiped his mustache one last time before the disaster struck. But he hadn't counted on Scrap. The quick-thinking young woman slipped into the chair Briggs held for her. Before anyone else could speak, Lottie leaned forward and said,
Just imagine, Caroline, Rose's husband got here so quickly.
Scrap turned to him without a trace of surprise. She held out her hand, smiled like an angel, and said,
"And here I am, late on your very first evening."
"The daughter of Lord Droitwich." Chapter 22. That night was a full moon. The garden became an enchanted place where all the flowers looked white. You could see the lilies, daphnes, orange blossoms, white stalks, carnations, and white roses as clearly as in the daytime. The colored flowers, however, could only be sensed by their sweet fragrance. After dinner, the three younger women sat on the low wall at the edge of the upper garden, with Rose sitting slightly apart from the others. They watched the huge moon rise slowly over the bay where the poet Shelley had lived his final months nearly 100 years earlier. The sea shimmered under the moonlight. Stars twinkled in the sky. The mountains were soft blue outlines dotted with clusters of lights from small villages. The plants in the garden stood perfectly still, without a breath of wind to stir them. Through the glass doors, the dining room, with its candlelit table and bright nasturtiums and marigolds, glowed like a colorful cave. The three men sitting around it, smoking, looked lively and animated compared to the quiet, cool calm outside. Mrs. Fisher had gone inside to the fireplace in the drawing room. Scrap and Lottie looked up at the sky, speaking only in whispers. Rose remained silent, also looking up at the sky. She was staring at the pine tree, which looked glorious silhouetted against the stars. Every now and then, Scrap and Lottie would look at Rose. She was truly beautiful tonight. Even among the most famous beauties, she would have stood out. No one could have overshadowed her. She was practically glowing. Lottie leaned close to Scrap's ear. "Love," she whispered. Scrap nodded. "Yes," she whispered back. She had to admit it. You only had to look at Rose to know she was in love.
"There's nothing like it,"
Lottie whispered. Scrap was silent.
"It's a wonderful thing,"
Lottie whispered after a moment, as they both watched Rose.
"to just let yourself love. Can you think of anything else in the world that works such miracles?"
Scrap couldn't answer her, and even if she could, this was no night to start an argument. This was a night for. She stopped herself. Love again. It was everywhere, and there was no escaping it. She had come to San Salvador to escape it, and yet here was everyone experiencing it in different ways. Even Mrs. Fisher seemed to have been touched by it. At dinner, she was different, showing concern because Mr. Briggs wasn't eating, her face soft with motherly affection. Scrap looked up at the pine tree standing still against the stars. Beauty made you love, and love made you beautiful. She pulled her shawl closer around her, trying to guard herself. She didn't want to get sentimental, but it was hard not to hear. The beautiful night crept in through every gap, bringing overwhelming emotions, feelings about death, time, and wasted years. They were glorious and terrifying feelings of deep longing. She felt small and incredibly alone, exposed and defenseless. She pulled her chiffon shawl tighter, trying to shield herself from the vastness of the universe. "I suppose," Lottie whispered.
"Rose's husband looks to you like just an ordinary, friendly, middle-aged man."
Scrap looked down from the stars, focusing her attention on Lottie.
"Just a rather stout, red-faced man."
Lottie whispered. Scrap nodded. "He isn't," Lottie whispered.
"Rose sees past all that. That's just the surface. She sees what we can't see because she loves him."
"Always love." Scrap stood up, wrapping her shawl tightly around herself. She walked to her daytime corner, sat alone on the wall, and looked out across the sea where the sun had set, toward the faint shadow of France in the distance. Yes, love worked wonders, and Mr. Arundel, she still struggled to think of him as Frederick, was Rose's whole world. But love could also do the opposite. It didn't always turn people into angels. Sometimes it made them worse. She had experienced far too much of it in her life. If it had left her alone, or at least been less intense, she might have turned out to be a kind, generous person. And what was she now, thanks to all this love Lottie talked about? Scrap looked at herself honestly. She was a spoiled, bitter, suspicious, and selfish woman. The glass doors of the dining room opened, and the three men walked out into the garden, with Mr. Wilkins' voice leading the way. He seemed to be doing all the talking, while the other two walked in silence. She She thought she should go back to Lottie and Rose. It would be annoying to be cornered by Mr. Briggs in her dead-end spot. She stood up reluctantly, annoyed that Mr. Briggs's presence forced her to keep moving from her favorite spots. She walked out from the bushes wishing she looked as stern and cold as she felt, which might make Mr. Briggs lose interest and leave her alone. But she knew she looked nothing like that. At dinner, his hand had shaken when he drank, and he couldn't speak to her without blushing and turning pale. Mrs. Fisher had looked at her with pleading eyes, silently begging her not to hurt the young man. How could a man behave this way? Scrap thought, frowning. He was young, attractive, and intelligent, surely meant for better things. He had brains, she had watched him at dinner and was sure of it. He had a noble, kind forehead that suggested character. It was a pity he allowed himself to be so infatuated by a pretty face, wasting his energy and peace of mind on her. If only he could see past her looks, he would be cured, and she could sit by herself in peace. Just past the bushes, she ran into Frederick, who was in a hurry.
I wanted to find you before I went to Rose.
He said, he added quickly.
I want to kiss your shoes.
Do you? Scrap smiled.
Then I must go change into my new ones. These aren't nice enough.
She felt very friendly toward Frederick now. He, at least, would not try to pursue her. His chasing days were over. He was a nice, pleasant man, and she liked him. He had obviously been in some sort of mess, and she was grateful Lottie had stopped her from making it worse at dinner. Whatever the problem had been, he was out of it now. His face and Rose's had the same happy glow.
I will adore you forever now,
Frederick said. Scrap smiled. Will you? She said.
I admired you before for your beauty. Now I admire you because you're not just beautiful, but you're as loyal as a true friend.
Scrap laughed amused. Am I?
When that impulsive woman, thank goodness she was impulsive, blurted out that I was Rose's husband, you acted just like a loyal friend would.
Frederick continued. Did I? Scrap said, her dimple showing.
It's the rarest combination.
Frederick said.
To be a beautiful woman with the loyalty of a brother.
Is it? Scrap smiled wistfully. These were very nice compliments. If only she were really like that.
And I still want to kiss your shoes.
Won't this do instead?
She asked, holding out her hand. He took her hand, kissed it quickly, and hurried off. God bless you, he said as he walked away.
Where is your luggage?
Scrap called after him. Oh, right, Frederick said, pausing.
It's at the station.
I'll send for it.
He disappeared through the bushes. She went inside to arrange it, which was why Domenico found himself walking to Mezzago for the second time that night, wondering what was going on. Having arranged for the couple's happiness, she walked back out to the garden, deep in thought. Love brought happiness to everyone but her. Everyone here had been touched by it except her. Poor Mr. Briggs had been hit by the most awkward kind of infatuation. He was a difficult problem, and she was afraid his departure tomorrow wouldn't solve it. When she reached the others, Frederick was already walking off with Rose, his arm through hers, heading toward the privacy of the lower garden. They had a lot to talk about. Their relationship had gone wrong but was suddenly fixed. Lottie would say it was the magic of San Salvador. She could believe in that magic now. Even she was happier here than she had been in years. The only one left out was Mr. Briggs. Poor Mr. Briggs. When she saw him, he looked too nice and youthful to be so unhappy. It didn't seem right that the owner of this beautiful place, the one who made their stay possible, should be the only one to leave empty-handed. She felt a wave of regret. She had spent such peaceful days in his house, enjoying his garden, flowers, views, and furniture. It was the most relaxing and thoughtful time of her life, and it was all thanks to him. She knew she paid a small rent, but that was nothing compared to what she got in return. And it was thanks to renting this place that she met Lottie. Otherwise, they never would have met. Feeling guilty and suddenly very grateful, Scrap walked straight up to Briggs.
I owe you so much,
she said, realizing how much she had to thank him for and feeling ashamed of how cold she had been to him earlier. Of course, he hadn't realized she was being cold, since her beautiful face hid her bad mood, but she knew it. She had been cold to everyone for years. If anyone could see through her looks, they would see she was just a spoiled, bitter, suspicious, and selfish woman.
I owe you so much.
Scrap said earnestly, walking right up to Briggs, humbled by her own thoughts. He stared at her in wonder. "You owe me," he stammered.
But it is I who.
To see her standing in his garden, no white flower was more beautiful than she was. "Please," Scrap said earnestly.
Let's just be honest, you don't owe me anything, why would you?
I don't owe you anything.
Briggs repeated.
I owe you the most beautiful sight of my life.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Scrap pleaded.
Please just talk to me normally, don't be so humble, why should you be? It's silly, you're worth 50 of me.
Unwise, thought Mr. Wilkins, who was standing nearby while Lottie sat on the wall. He was shocked that Lady Caroline was encouraging Briggs. Very unwise, he thought, shaking his head. Briggs was already in such a bad state that the only option was to reject him completely, Mr. Wilkins believed. Kindness would only be misunderstood by the poor young man. Lady Caroline couldn't possibly want to encourage him. Briggs was fine, but his name alone showed they were from different social classes. Perhaps Lady Caroline didn't realize how encouraging her voice and face made her words sound. She needed a wise advisor like him. There she was, practically holding her hands out to Briggs. Briggs deserved thanks for the holiday, but not this way, alone with Lady Caroline in the moonlight. Trying to rescue Lady Caroline with some quick tact, Mr. Wilkins said heartily,
It is very proper that you are thanked, Briggs. Let me add my thanks and my wife's to Lady Caroline's. We should have toasted you at dinner, there should have been some.
But Briggs ignored him completely, continuing to look at Lady Caroline as if she were the only woman in the world. Lady Caroline ignored him too, looking at Briggs with a pleading expression. Most unwise, Mr. Wilkins thought. Lottie, however, stepped in. She got up from the wall, put her arm through Mr. Wilkins, and pulled him away.
I want to tell you something, Mellersh.
Lottie said, pulling him. Later, Mr. Wilkins said, waving her off. No now, Lottie insisted, dragging him away. He went very reluctantly. Briggs shouldn't be given any encouragement at all.
Well, what is it?
He asked impatiently as they walked toward the house.
Lady Caroline shouldn't be left alone like that.
Oh, she isn't alone.
Lottie said, as if answering his unspoken thoughts.
Caroline is perfectly fine.
She is not fine, that young Briggs is.
Of course he is. What did you expect? Let's go inside to the fire and Mrs. Fisher. She's all alone.
I cannot leave Lady Caroline alone in the gardens.
Mr. Wilkins said, trying to go back.
Don't be silly, Mellersh. She isn't alone. Besides, I want to tell you something.
Well, tell me then.
Inside.
Very reluctantly, Mr. Wilkins let himself be led farther from Lady Caroline. He trusted his wife now, but he was sure she was making a huge mistake. Inside, Mrs. Fisher was sitting by the fire. Mr. Wilkins preferred warm rooms to dark gardens anyway, so he was glad to be inside, but he wished Lady Caroline were safe too. Mrs. Fisher sat with her hands folded, staring into the fire. A reading lamp was set up, but she wasn't reading. Her old literary heroes didn't seem interesting tonight. They always said the same things, and there was nothing new to learn from them. They were great writers, but they had one major flaw: they were dead. Nothing new could come from them, while the living still offered endless possibilities. She wanted to connect with living, growing people now. She wished she had a son like Mr. Briggs, who was alive, affectionate, and could care for her. The look on her face touched Lottie's heart. Poor old dear, she thought, realizing how lonely old age could be, especially for a childless woman who had failed to make friends. It seemed people were happiest in pairs, whether as lovers, friends, siblings, or parents and children. Where was Mrs. Fisher's other half? Lottie decided to kiss her again. The kiss earlier had worked wonders, and she had felt Mrs. Fisher's warm response. She walked over, leaned down, kissed her, and said cheerfully,
We've come inside.
This time, Mrs. Fisher actually reached up and held Lottie's cheek against hers. She felt safe with this warm, affectionate woman who did unusual things so naturally. She knew Lottie wouldn't make her feel embarrassed. Lottie was delighted. I think I'm the other half of her pair, she thought. I'm going to be close friends with Mrs. Fisher. She looked up, laughing. The changes brought by San Salvador were amazing, her and Mrs. Fisher. But she could see them becoming very close.
Where are the others?
Mrs. Fisher asked. Thank you, dear, she added as Lottie slipped a footstool under her short legs. I can see myself bringing footstools to Mrs. Fisher for years to come, Lottie thought, her eyes dancing. The roses, Lottie said, standing up,
have gone down to the lower garden, I think to make love.
The roses.
The Fredericks, then, they are completely inseparable now. Why not just say the Arbuthnot's, my dear?
Mr. Wilkins suggested.
Very well, Mellersh, the Arbuthnot's, and the Carolines.
Both Mr. Wilkins and Mrs. Fisher gasped. Mr. Wilkins, normally so controlled, was shocked and felt angry with his wife for the first time since arriving. Really? He began indignantly.
All right, Mellersh, the Briggses, then.
The Briggses, Mr. Wilkins cried, genuinely angry. The implication was an insult to Lady Caroline's noble family. Really? I'm sorry, Mellersh, Lottie said, pretending to be meek.
If you don't like it.
Like it, you've lost your mind. They only met today.
True, but that's why they can start now.
Start now? Mr. Wilkins could only echo her words in disbelief. I'm sorry, Mellersh, Lottie repeated, but... Her gray eyes sparkled with that same bright conviction that had surprised Rose on their first meeting.
There's no use fighting it.
She said.
I wouldn't resist if I were you, because...
She stopped, looking at their worried, serious faces, and laughed.
I see them becoming the Briggses.
Lottie concluded. During the final week, the mock orange bushes and acacias bloomed at San Salvador. No one had realized how many acacia trees there were until one day the garden was filled with a new scent, and the delicate trees, succeeding the wisteria, were covered in blossoms among their trembling leaves. Lying under an acacia tree that last week, looking up through the branches at the white flowers against the blue sky as a gentle breeze shook down their sweet scent, was pure happiness. Gradually, the entire garden turned white and filled with fragrance. The lilies were as strong as ever, surrounded by white stalks, carnations, climbing white roses, mock orange, jasmine, and finally, the scent of the acacias. When they left on the 1st of May and passed through the gates into the village, they could still smell the sweet acacias. Copyright and about this edition. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening to this modernized edition of the Enchanted April. We hope you enjoyed the story of Mrs. Wilkins, Mrs. Arbuthnot, and their escape to the sunny Mediterranean. Feedback and review request. Your support means the world to us. If you enjoyed this book, please consider leaving a review or rating on the platform where you acquired it. Your feedback helps us improve future editions and select other classic novels to adapt. About this modernized edition. This edition of Elizabeth von Arnim's 1922 classic has been carefully adapted and modernized by TKPROF LLC. Our modernization process focuses on simplifying Victorian and early 20th century aristocratic language to flow naturally for modern readers and ESL/EFL learners, breaking down long, complex sentence structures into clear, active, and engaging English, preserving 100% of the original characters, plot, setting, and emotional depth of the story. Word count comparison. Original 1922 edition, approximately 77,000 words. Modernized casual edition, approximately 76,000 words. Copyright notice. Published by TKPROF LLC. Copyright 2026 by TKPROF LLC. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the publisher.